Welcome to the Queen City Music Podcast, the podcast devoted to the local music scene in Charlotte, North Carolina. Now, here's your host, Matthew Ablan.
Hello and welcome to episode 35 of the Queen City Music Podcast. This month, it's my pleasure to speak with independent recording artist Mark Kroos. Mark is probably best known for his fingerstyle acoustic guitar playing on a double-neck Ovation guitar. His style is reminiscent of other fingerstyle artists such as Tommy Emmanuel, Andy McKee, and Khaki King. But make no mistake, Mark has a style that is uniquely his own. Hey, Mark, great to have you on the podcast. I appreciate you coming out today and taking your time out of your day for us.
Thanks a lot, Matthew. I appreciate you having me on.
So, first question, are you originally from the Charlotte area?
I am not originally from the Charlotte area, as so many other Charlotteans. It's very rare you find native Charlotteans. Is that what we call us?
Yeah, we are Charlotteans.
Okay, I guess it's better than charlatans. But yeah, I'm originally from Michigan. Lansing, Michigan is where I grew up. It's right in the middle of the mitten there, the capital city, and it's honestly it was a great place to grow up, great place to learn how to drive because of all the snow.
That's the truth. Can you tell us a little bit about your musical background? When did you start getting into music? When did you start getting into guitar?
I didn't really listen to music until about the 5th grade or so. It wasn't a big part of my family. Like we'd have music on in the house sometimes, but it was never a priority. It was never a big priority to listen to music. Right. And in 7th grade, that's when I began playing the guitar. Got into Blink-182 got really big that year. The pop punk band from the 90s. And I listened to that. I listened to that album that came out, and I said, "This is the best thing I've ever heard." I fell in love with pop punk, and
a lot of people did.
Oh my gosh, man! And to this day, and I got into some other other artists, right. Many other artists since then in the punk rock genre, and but kudos to Blink-182 for getting me into it. But to this day, I still absolutely love punk rock. Absolutely love it. It's
always curious to me, and I've said this in several past interviews. I keep finding when I talk to musicians that there seems to be a certain age that everybody starts getting into music, and I don't understand what that is, but it's always around 6th, 7th grade, 10 between let's say 10 and like 13 to maybe 14, and it's something that they get really excited about.
Yeah, it's right when you start to believe that your life has problems, and so it's funny, and it's that your hormones are changing and everything. Yep. You're starting to. I remember 6th grade being when I really found that I started to worry and I started to get anxiety. And I was like, what is this new thing? What is this? And, it's that time of your life where you're having some huge changes, whether they're serious or not, right. whether they're real or not. For me, it was, in hindsight, it was a lot of anxiety, depression, that kind of thing. Right. In Michigan, we just call it the winter, but, but
no,
really,
I laugh because I lived in Cleveland for a good 11 years.
Oh man, that's a rough winter. That is a rough one. All the snow. Cleveland and Buffalo probably have the 2 worst winters in the country.
Well, it was not even the snow bothered me. It's just from October till about April, it would just be gray and overcast.
Yeah, the sun doesn't shine. You won't see the sun for a month.
No, and when I moved to Charlotte, I was amazing to be here in December and see a blue sky.
Yeah, it's Charlotte is a good area. I mean, it's a brutal summer there. It really is. But the winter going through, and before we ever moved there, I remember going through in January once or twice being like, it's 60 degrees today. What's the deal with this? So, but that's sort of how I got into music. That's sort of my, how I got started. It was really in punk rock and bands like Green Day, that kind of thing. And it was great. It was something I was really, really able to hold on to.
So did you primarily did you play electric at all since you got into Blink-182, or did you just start with an acoustic?
Yeah, I started technically on my great-grandfather's nylon string guitar.
Okay.
And I saved up to buy an electric guitar. And first guitar was a, black Squier Stratocaster. And when that started kind of falling apart after about 6 months, I saved up and I got a red Fender Richie Sambora artist signature Mexican-made Strat. I got it used at Marshall Music in Lansing for $250. And the guitar is actually in our storage unit in Charlotte right now. But so I don't have it with me. The only electric that I have with me is this Dot that you might be able to see there. I guess your listeners won't be able to see it, but it's an Epiphone Dot, and it's a sweet guitar. Actually, I love this guitar. I'm gonna use it for some recording pretty soon.
When did you make that switch into? Because it seems primarily now you just do acoustic music. So when did you make that switch to acoustic?
I got into the music of Michael Hedges. Are you familiar with Michael Hedges?
Yes, I actually it was not on my radar for a long time because I grew up listening to a lot of classic rock and hard rock. I always knew the name but never got into him until the last maybe 10 years listening to his stuff.
Oh man. Yeah, he was he had a phenomenal technique. Just really, really fantastic. Yep. I mean, I believe he'd been trained at Peabody probably as a classical guitarist. I could be wrong about that. Don't quote me on that. But his technique is that good that that I would believe it. But I got into his music and I got into alternate tunings. And what was beautiful about the alternate tunings was they weren't really guitar to me. I was still pretty burned out on guitar. At that time, if I were to pick up an electric guitar or any guitar in standard tuning, I'd just revert back to those jazz chords that at the time I didn't really like. Right. But I'd done them for so long in jazz school, it was just ingrained into me. And so it was kind of like, and a lot of this was on a single guitar neck. I didn't get the double neck until right before I moved to Virginia. But doing the tapping techniques, it was like playing a different instrument, and that was I think in a lot of ways what got me back into the guitar was not treating it like a guitar, because it had become such a chore for me, sadly, and I think that's something that happens to a lot of people in music school, and so. But then, that job at Busch Gardens, I was playing electric guitar, dressing up as a cowboy, playing pop and country music. We played Friends in Low Places 500 times that summer. It was a blast, man. I mean, I'd always taken myself so seriously in music, writing original music. I almost didn't take the job because I found out I'd have to dress up as a cowboy. And when I did, it was such a contrast to music school where people took themselves so seriously, and it was just these incredibly fun-loving people, just some of the best people I've ever met, and really great musicians too, really, really fantastic. And we just had so much fun, and it was a good healing process for me, I think, in that way.
Well, I think it's also when you're coming from music school and then you have a gig like that, it also gives you a kick in the pants that not that it's not serious what they're doing, but this is what most musicians do. There's a lot of day-to-day gigs that you take to make a living and make money, as opposed to I'm only writing my own music or touring with an orchestra or a jazz band and we play serious music, because you know what? A lot of stuff is background.
Yeah, yeah. And it's we can talk again. We can talk about being an independent artist, but
Yeah.
it really taught me. So in the culture of punk rock, as much as I love the music, there was a lot of the culture that I had to learn to let go of, because it can be a very, very judgmental culture. The idea of a sellout.
Right.
And I think being an independent artist for 10 years now has really, taught me to never judge anybody on, preferably anything, but never judge anybody on what they need to do to get by.
Yeah. So just to bring around, Mark, when you got into acoustic playing, it was because of Michael Hedges. What was that? What made you get into the double neck playing, particularly? Because that's essentially, if somebody looks up Mark Kroos, they're finding out you're an acoustic double neck player. So when did you get into that? How did that happen?
Yeah, so that was right before I left for Virginia in 2009. I'd been playing that style of Michael Hedges for a little while, using both hands to fret. I started writing some of my own tunes. In fact, I should have sent you this tune because I have it recorded. It's called Indigo Child. It's on my first album, And Grace Will Lead Me Home.
That's funny. I just listened to the video.
Oh, that's fun.
I did listen to the video on your website, yeah.
Well, this tune was the first tune that not that I started writing, but that I started writing and I found that my hands were getting in the way of each other, and that I wanted to play on the same register of the guitar with both hands, fretting with both hands. And so I set up, it's before I got the double neck, I set up a single neck guitar laying flat, and I used my right hand to play that one. I used my left hand to play another one. And I put them together, and it was clumsy as all get out. It was very, very clumsy, but I could do it. I found it was possible for me to do it. And from being incredibly obsessive in music school, I had adopted the belief that anything that's possible to do, I can do it. That whole idea. I'm too tired for that now. I've gotten too old for that idea. But it is true though. With enough practice, I do believe that on the guitar you can learn to do anything. And so what I said though was, I'm going to get a double neck guitar and I'm going to try to play both necks at the same time.
Okay.
And so I found my original double neck on eBay for a very reasonable price. And I said, I'm going to get this guitar. I'm going to try it. If it doesn't work for what I want to use it for, I'm going to sell it on eBay and get my money back. And the day it showed up in the mail, man, I can't tell you how well it just worked. For like everything was right in front of me. It was no longer like having to look at my right hand or my left hand. I could see it all. I was able to steady it against my body. So like if you try to just tap on a guitar that's laying on a keyboard stand or something, it's going to jiggle all over the place. With my double neck guitar, I just hold it against my body very tight, and it works really, really well. And that's where we were talking before the interview started, that there's nothing I'd really change about this guitar, even though it's not made to be played that way. It's made to be played as a 12-string up top. You play that guitar, and then you switch to the 6-string.
Right.
And I can't believe it works so well for trying to play them both at once.
And that was that was an Ovation guitar, correct?
Yeah, it was my original Ovation. And I'd never really played any Ovation guitars before that. And I started working with the company probably about 2 years later or so. And they've been really fantastic to get to play their guitars. They're really awesome.
You came on my radar because I'm actually a fan of Ovation Guitars.
Oh,
so
nice.
I go to their website and I always see who their current artists are who are using Ovation guitars, and you came up and I was like, oh, that looks interesting, let's check him out. And then I saw you were in the Charlotte area at that time, and I was like, man, I got to get this guy, call him and see if he wants to come on the podcast and talk. So
yeah, well, I appreciate you having me, Matthew. Ovation has been seriously great. I mean, they're absolutely killer guitars. They're a great company. they recently got their product manager back, Rick Hall, who is he's a wonderful human being, just an amazing person. I got to see him out at NAMM in January out in Anaheim, and we did some work together filming some videos. And he had been away from the company for maybe 5 to 8 years when the company was bought by Fender. And he was, I don't know how long he'd been there before he left, but then when he came back, the guy is just, I mean, they're designing great stuff. The quality has just been fantastic, and I love seeing them doing so well because they're my favorite guitar company.
Yeah, I played them a number of years ago, so I had bought a cheaper one when I started getting into Ovations. I bought a cheaper one, a mid-sized depth, and it was a Chinese-made instrument, and the binding started coming off. So at some point I said, no, I returned it to the store, and I got another one, which was a fantastic guitar, but of course it was the total round back mid-depth. And I was like, okay, this is nice, but I love the guitar, but the mid-depth drove me bonkers with the round back. And then I came across the contoured back.
The Contour Bowl. Okay, nobody knows about it. No, right? Nobody knows about the Contour Bowl. It's the best thing.
It is.
They're incredible. The single neck that I play, it's called the Ovation Folklore.
Yes.
And
nylon. Is that a nylon string?
It's not. No, they make a nylon string version of it.
Okay.
This one is a steel string. It's even got a classical style headstock, which is beautiful. It's a pain to restring, but it's totally worth it. But it has a contour bowl, and I love it. I love that, and it's kind of the funny thing. I always give them sort of a hard time. I'm like, this is the best thing you guys have ever come up with, and nobody's like. I feel like it's never really been pushed, but it's my favorite. Some people like the sound of the round back better, like the idea that it projects better. But to me, a lot of the time with guitars, what you want for stage is not always what you're going to want for just playing at home or for recording.
Right.
A lot of the time I've found that if it's a large venue, especially, and the PA is turned up really, really loud, I have two double necks, okay? I have a newer one, which is very, very resonant, sounds very, very good acoustically. And then I have my original one, which has been beat up, man. I mean, it's really been beat up. There are cracks in the top. It doesn't sound as good acoustically because it's not held together quite. I mean, it's definitely dulled acoustically. And I found that in bigger venues, I really, really like the old one better, actually, because it's not as prone to feedback. It's just, it's so much easier to control. And I've really, really found that a lot of the time what you want for a live setting, especially if the PA is loud, is not exactly the same thing that you always want for just acoustic playing.
Right.
They're different guitars for different purposes. It's a great way to be able to convince your spouse to let you have 13 guitars. I mean, it's right. Like,
I don't have a spouse, but I have quite a few guitars.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and there you go. And that's a great way to have many guitars. So my wife is always supportive of that kind of thing. She is.
So your double necks that you play, are they celebrities or are they American-made ones? Which ones do you have?
They are celebrities.
Okay.
They're the ones that are made in Korea, and it's just really funny because I've never. They're not made to be played, to be used this way. They're not made to be a 6 on top and a 6 on the bottom, and they're not made to be tapped like that. And given that they're not made that way, or not made for that purpose, I should say, it's amazing how well they work for it. There's literally, off the top of my head right now, thinking about it, there's nothing I would change.
You said the older one sounds better, and I don't know what year my double neck Celebrity is made. I just purchased it several months ago, used from somebody. But my curiosity would be is maybe your older one that you like sounds better is because maybe the build was better because it's an older guitar, whereas the newer ones might not have the same quality of build because they're built overseas. I mean,
well, actually, with this situation, they're both made in Korea.
Okay.
And so some people have mentioned things like that, especially I think in reference to like the Ovations that were made in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people really like and I don't know off the top of my head what year. I think one of mine is a 2003.
Okay.
However, and I think that's the older one. The newer one has got to be around 2010. I like the older one for live performance, but the newer one is honestly the better guitar. It really, really is. And I think what you're talking about with like the ups and downs in build quality, you get that from year to year, but also it's funny because I think we tend to think of like the model of a guitar as like all of that model, they're all going to play that way. Like, like we tend to think of them all the same way. And with any brand, and whether it's US made or Korean made or whatever, I often I'll pick up, different guitars at Guitar Center or wherever. And it's like, wow, that's supposed to be the same guitar. That plays nothing like the other guitar. Yeah. And obviously too, setup and all of that factors into it as well. So, but yeah, it's kind of funny. My two different main axes, the two different double necks, the newer one, I love it in the studio. I love that resonant sound in the studio. And then the older one, I'll probably never record with it again just because it's just been so beat up. But I love it. I love it live. I just love it live, especially in a larger venue setting. It's much more manageable.
Hey, Mark, can you talk about your particular style of playing? When you do a lot of tapping to create the sound, what prompted you to get into that besides, we spoke about getting into it with two guitars and moving on to the double neck. There was something that just clicked from the Michael Hedges thing for you that you wanted to do that?
I've got to give credit where credit's due here as well. Andy McKee was definitely an influence there because if you actually look at a lot of Michael Hedges' work, I mean, we're talking the godfather of this style. I mean, we're talking about the original guy, Michael Hedges, Don Ross, Preston Reed. And Preston Reed does a fair bit of right-hand tapping. Michael Hedges did not do a ton of it. He did some, but I remember I learned the song "Drifting" by Andy McKee, and that song is all tapping. It's all tapping on a single guitar neck, and it was challenging, but it was easy enough. Where it is easy enough that a guitar player who's been playing for a while can learn it in a day or two, and it definitely took me a day or three. But yeah, that was definitely something that also inspired me as well, was Andy McKee. But learning to set up the guitar so that the action is very, very low, so that you can just basically just press down and you'll get a note. That's the idea with this style, is that instead of using two hands to get a note, your fretting hand and your picking hand, you use just your fretting hand to press down, and the strings are low enough to the fingerboard that you get that sound of that note. And then that frees up the right hand to play other notes. And it's a bit of multitasking, and it's probably trying to focus on way too many things at the same time. But, it's a lot of fun. It really is.
Hey, Mark, let's take a moment and listen to the track "All God's Children Have Wings" off your 2012 recording, Down Along the Lines of Joy.
Yeah.
Mark, that's a spectacular track. What's your mindset? How do you begin to write something like that?
So a lot of the time with the double neck guitar, I'll try to come up with something that the left hand can do all by itself. Because when the left hand is able to play a part all by itself, you're in a really, really good spot. And then you can do whatever you want to do with the right hand, and you can create that polyphonic sort of texture where you've got two different things going on at the same time.
Right.
And so with that, I think actually with that track, it was sort of the opposite, where I wrote the right hand part first, because that holds the drone string with the thumb, and then the melody that's tapped with the fingers and picked a little bit, and then the left hand kind of plays circles around it. And I believe that's how I wrote the song. It was in 2012, but that's kind of where my mind went. As far as other structure goes, though, if anybody's listening and knows their music theory, you'll notice that if you watch the videos, it all looks pretty complicated, because it's two different guitars necks being played simultaneously. But the chord structure, the musical theory structure, is actually very, very simple. A lot of the time I'll use maybe 3 or 4 chords in an entire song, and in that way a lot of my playing is still a lot like punk rock, just 3 or 4 chords.
Back to your roots.
Back to the roots. So but I'll choose a chord progression. Sometimes I'll choose a chord progression based on what I'm able to play. And maybe I shouldn't just limit that to chord progressions. Maybe I'll choose my parts based on what I'm able to play, which some composers would really argue against. They'd say, no, you got to compose the way you want to compose, and you learn to play it. Okay. But
yeah,
it's that's kind of the way that I've composed a lot of the things on the double neck is, well, maybe I'd like to do this, but I'm able to do this, and that sounds pretty good too, so let's go with that. Everybody's limited in some way to their technique.
There's certain things I even know when I'm playing in my duo. I'm out performing. I'll have my friend sing certain songs because I physically can't play something at the same time and sing it. So I need somebody else to kind of cover it. A lot of stuff I can, but occasionally there's things that I can't do and sing at the same time. So
what I'm finding with that, because me 8 years ago would have said, well, if I'm in that situation, I'm going to learn to do it. I'm going to learn to do it. And I think about this cover that I did about 8 years ago of Yellow by Coldplay, the song. And I look back on the video. You can find the video on YouTube. And I look at it, and I didn't do too bad, but I tried to sing it and play it on the double neck at the same time. And it's fine. It's fine. But I tried to do too much. I definitely tried to do too much. The singing would have been better if I hadn't been trying to play the double neck guitar at the same time. The double neck guitar playing would have been better if I hadn't been trying to sing at the same time. And it's just, music, I think at the end of the day, in many ways, is meant to be played with other people. And it's a beautiful thing to share with other people. Solo playing is awesome, but it is sort of funny, maybe ironic, coming from the guy who has been doing this solo guitar career for the past 10 years, but I'm starting to realize that maybe multitasking is overrated. I don't know.
Hey, it's good to know that even somebody who's made a name for themselves in a certain area of playing is able to reevaluate as a musician.
Yeah, I know I'm really selling my music here with that kind of, but you're always growing. You're always growing as an artist, and for me, I miss playing with people. I definitely miss playing with people. There's an energy that you get there that you don't get playing solo. So we'll see where the next few years take me and everything.
Hey, I want to jump forward a little bit to your new recording that you put out recently, Lose the Shoes. Mm-hmm. So, speaking of changing, was there any changes between that album you did down along the lines of Joy and Loose Shoes? Did your approach change at all?
Yeah, so there are 8 years between those two albums, and an album between them. Actually,
right.
There was another album too, but in those 8 years, the biggest change was my embracing the concept of actually practicing rhythm. Really, really working on my rhythm, working on my timing, on my groove, and so Lose the Shoes is as close as I'm gonna come to a groove album. Like that's and when you hear this track, that's where it's at. That's come. I guess that was recorded in 2019, so last year. Right. And so about 2019, this is about as good as I was able to do for a groove, and I'm happy with it. I don't know if I'll be happy with it a few years from now. But I do like this song a lot. This song, Lose the Shoes, that you're going to play. I get a lot of joy out of playing it live as well.
Well, let's take a listen to Lose the Shoes. Mark, I really love that track. So we've had a chance to listen to some of your music as a solo artist. I'm really curious. Can you jump into the topic for us about being an independent artist today? What's that been like for you?
Yeah.
I mean, I imagine there's a lot to cover.
Yeah, there could be a lot to cover if you want to get into it, because I mean, being an independent artist has become very, very popular in the past, I guess, basically since Napster, really. Mm-hmm. Because if we think about Napster, that was kind of like the downfall of the recording, when music became free, right. And so a lot of people really embraced the idea of becoming independent artists, because if the stereotypical record label deal is that you get 10%,
right?
Which to a lot of people sounds very, very small, And so the idea of being an independent artist, where you are your own record label, you record your own music. I mean, basically, independent artist really means you're not on a record label. Whether or not you have a manager, whether or not you have a booking agent, a promoter, right, or stuff, that's up to you. But really, independent artist comes down to you're not on a record label. That became super, people really liked that idea, And artists really liked it, so they really gravitated towards it. You heard about artists who would sign on to a label for their first album. They'd get a big fan base, and then they'd drop the label for the next album. And people just loved that idea. The artists loved it because they, get to keep all the money. The fans loved it because, our artists are independent and everything.
Right.
And it was almost kind of like an uprising in that way. And I started my career in 2010, right after the housing market fell apart. Our economy really fell apart in a lot of ways. And so going into this recession, and so I think I had this sort of self-righteous idea of being an independent artist. And there was a label I would have really liked to be on at the time, but I, in hindsight, was not ready to be on that label. I was not good enough listening back to my music that I was releasing in that time to be on that label. So I just kind of said, well, I'm going to be an independent artist. And I personally think that so for me, being an independent artist meant not on a label, no booking agent, because frankly, when I was starting out, nobody would make any money by being my booking agent. So why would they be my booking agent? So I was my own booking agent. And I was my own promoter, and I was my own manager. And when you are 24 years old, you feel like you can really handle all those things. Like that definitely, and I was able to kind of handle it.
What's the hardest aspect of that, though? So you're booking your own gigs, you're writing your own music. What do you consider one of the hardest parts of that? I would think the music part is just, that's something everybody wants to do. But what's the really difficult part of that?
I think at the time, none of it felt difficult because I was so excited about it. Okay. Maybe the most difficult part of it at the time was that after the first year, I started running into just being exhausted. But I was like, I'm in my mid-20s, whatever. Right. I'm in my mid-20s. I'm young. Now the most difficult part of it, I think, is looking and saying, I've had this really great career for the past 10 years that I've been blessed enough to get to build up. I've played some really, really great shows, played some really great tours, get to travel with my wife, who is just phenomenal. I mean, I've been married to this woman for 7 years, and I fall in love with her more every day. She's just incredible. And however, for the past 10 years, I haven't been happy through a lot of it. And that's like, when that's the case, when you've got this great thing going for you and you're not happy, I mean, first thing you feel is this absolute guilt and shame, because what's wrong with me? Am I ungrateful? That kind of thing. But then you've really got to reassess, what your priorities are. And so I think for me, a lot of that independent artist, that self-righteous independent artist and I guess not greed, but saying, well, this is the best way to do it because I get to keep all the money. I don't need to pay somebody else to do this. I don't need to rely on anybody else. And that, I think, looking back and going, I've got to assess this a little differently in the future. I'm 34 years old now, and there are days I definitely feel like I'm a bit older than that, in terms of what my body is capable of doing, going out and doing.
Well, I think a lot of artists today. Yeah, no, I was just going to say a lot of artists today, I mean, they are trying to be more independent because you're forced to be, because the record industry has just completely changed. There's nobody's getting plucked from obscurity anymore, getting handed a bunch of money and saying, hey, you just go record. We're going to handle everything else. A lot of folks today are producing their own music themselves. And then with the advent, of course, of the internet, they're distributing it themselves.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is they have to. Like you just said, they have to. I certainly felt that I had to when I started. I think that about 3 or 4 years ago was a point for me where I really should have started looking at building a team. I really should have started looking at that. But I wasn't willing to. I was stubborn. I was starting to make some good money doing it.
Right.
And it was like, I've got a good thing going here. I'm tired all the time, but I've got a good thing going here. And that would have been a good point to take on somebody else,
Right.
that kind of stuff. And so I ran into a gentleman in Charlotte, actually. I won't mention his name, not that it's a bad story about him or anything, but he was he was an artist that was on a label, and he toured, and they got him some pretty great arena shows opening for some pretty big acts. And he told me the story, and he was very grateful for all of it, but it was sort of the opposite of my story, where he was on, he had everybody handle everything, and he
Right.
was like, yeah, but at the end of the day, we only got about 10% and everything. And it was just kind of funny because, like, as he's telling me this story, I'm kind of crunching the numbers in my head, and I'm like, oh yeah, but you guys had these shows booked for you. You didn't have to book those shows, and you guys, it's like the grass is always greener, right?
Yes, yes.
And I think that it's a matter of finding balance. I think that also in the music business, there is this, especially post Napster, meaning like post mid 90s, when music started becoming free, there is this incredible poverty mentality, this mentality of non-abundance, that there isn't enough in music. I'm not saying it's that way. I'm saying that's
Right.
the mentality that you come across with all musicians everywhere. I mean, the first thing you hear from a lot of musicians is, and one thing I was kind of hesitant about, like even talking about with the music business with this, is making sure we don't get too much into the negativity of the disparity of, oh, the business is so hard,
Right.
because I've fallen into that before. It's so easy to gripe with other musicians about that. And it is tough because you're not getting paid, per download most of the time. You're getting
Right.
paid per stream most of the time. A lot of folks aren't buying CDs as much these days. They're maybe buying downloads, but people really like that Spotify thing. I like that Spotify thing.
Do you think it, though, for younger artists just starting out, it's a good thing for representing themselves because they start to learn those different aspects of the business, like booking and management, those kind of things?
I think it all depends on the person. I think that it depends on what their opportunities are. If they have, if they have if they have a parent that is willing to kind of drop everything and be their agent, and that kind of person, I run into them. I used to really resent that because I didn't have that growing up and everything. I had to
Right.
teach myself all the business, but like, in hindsight, looking at that, that's the kind of person, that's their path. I've had my advantages as well, and
Sure.
if their advantage is that they have a parent that is willing to, basically be their agent, be their manager, good for them. Like, really.
Right.
And if that's your path, if you're listening, great. Take what, when you're starting out, you gotta use the advantages that you have, that kind of thing. And I'd really encourage people to not get down on other people about the opportunities that they have. I can't tell you the number of times I've felt jealous of another artist for having a certain gig or something, but then I realize, man, I've gotten to play in some, like the shows that I've had the opportunity to play in the past,
Right.
because of my circumstances. Like, those are some shows that certain artists, like, they wouldn't be able to play because,
Right.
Maybe they don't fit into the church crowd or something like that.
Sure.
Maybe I mean, I think about artists that are maybe in the LGBTQ community, transgender community, where they're fantastic artists and they might not be welcome in a Christian church or
Right.
something like that. And that, whereas me, a white heterosexual Christian male gets invited in to play these churches, that are really, they're really, really great concerts, really great, great opportunities for me. So it's all just, it's important to be thankful for what you got.
Yeah. So Mark, just as we start to close things out, we're talking about things that you have coming up, but you've been taking a little break for a while, but you also have, let us know that you're kind of working on a vocal recording. So you're not exactly taking that much of a break. You guys still got some things going on. Is there anything else taking place for you since you're on a little bit of a hiatus?
Well,
any plans coming in?
And to be fair, we're all on a little bit of a hiatus right now.
That's true. That is true.
I will do another live stream concert at some point with the double neck guitar. If people do want to check out my website, markkroos.com, sign up for the mailing list. Kroos, my last name is, I guess you have it here on the podcast, but
yes,
it's spelled just like kangaroos without the anga, Kroos. Check out the videos, sign up for the mailing list, keep in touch. I will put out more music. The first thing I think will be this vocal album and maybe a collaboration with guitarist Dylan Reich. I've got a recording in the works with him. I also will mention again this live lesson course. Actually, it won't be live pretty soon. We've been doing them live, but now they're going to be pre-recorded and a little bit higher quality. But it's through jamplay.com, the lesson site, and it's called Riffs with Mark. And I'd encourage people to check that out. Over the next 8 weeks, I'm going to be kind of stepping up my game on it a little bit. I have a lesson coming up at 3:30 Eastern time, actually, that will be live today, Riffs with Mark. But actually, I guess by the time people hear this podcast, it won't be live anymore. But I've got that going. And, of course, the vocal album, which will be under the name Forgive Me, Savannah. We talked about Spotify and that kind of stuff a little bit. If you want to check out my music on Spotify, it's all there. Check out the Mark Kroos on Spotify, and then this album, Forgive Me, Savannah, the vocal project, will be there eventually. I just don't know when that's going to get done, but it's been a lot of fun, and I'm blessed to get to do what I do, man.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on, Mark. I really appreciate you taking the time, especially we spent a lot of time today just talking, so
that was a blast.
You got a lot to cover up.
Thanks a lot for having me on board, Matthew. I appreciate it.
All right, man. Thank you so much. And that will bring episode 35 of the Queen City Music Podcast to a close. If you enjoy listening to the QCMP, have suggestions for an episode, or would like to be a guest, reach out to me at qcmusicpodcast@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out our local partners, Records on the Wall, at rexonthewall.com. Until next month, get out there and support your local music scene by going to hear some of the talented musicians that call Charlotte home. Be well and stay safe.